So many of us speaking today, most of us have been students of Nesha's who are those who are primarily teaching the module when we travel to South Africa and Jamaica. And so the next panel is entitled Who is the Recipient? A Dialogue Between South African and U.S. Partners about the political and ideological issues of U.S. aid. And though I think everyone knows this person sitting in the second row here, I'll introduce her as well. Nesha Haniff, the creator of the Pedagogy of Action and the HIV module, has taught at the University of Michigan for over 15 years and has conducted the Pedagogy of Action in South Africa and Jamaica for 15 years. The POA alumni are well over 300 now. She spends her time between Ann Arbor, where she teaches classes in the Departments of Women's Studies and Afro-American and African Studies, and Jamaica, where she is in the process of developing a Pedagogy of Action project based on extricating poor women out of poverty.
Well, thank you, Raina. You know, I purposely did not, I must pay attention to technology. Yeah. I purposely did not want to present at the symposium because I wanted the students to be responsible and to be engaged in these discourses, which have been really excellent. And I feel very proud of them, but I sometimes feel like I'm at my funeral. Because Nesha, when Nesha said this and so on. So, on the one hand, I enjoy it, on the other hand, I think, wait, not yet. So, Rangoato Hlasane, who's supposed to present this panel, missed his plane this morning, so he couldn't get here, so he was very upset, so I told him not to worry, that I will do it. So I didn't have any plans to do it, so I will just speak as the ideas come to me. I just wanted to say that I try to teach. I'm very invested in teaching American students at the university level. And the reason I do that is because they run the world. It might be China next, but right now. And it's a very central place. And if we could conscientize these American students, and if we can make them feel something for us, and for us I mean in the developing world, then perhaps it would redound to our benefit at some point in time. Now this is a gamble, so I always say, if I teach 100 students, maybe 30 of them will get it. So I understand that conscientizing and empowering and all those words we use, these are privileges because they don't have to worry about food, they don't have to worry about transportation, they don't have to worry about their clothes, and many basic things. So I think that for me, that's very important. But I also come from being a colonizer, because I'm in America, and a colonized person. And once you've been colonized, as much as you try to do it, it's very difficult to extricate that from deep within yourself. And so it's something that I struggle with all the time with myself in doing this kind of work. And I want to go to what Rangoato says in the text here. He says, we are asking to play along with you of an uninvited help and other audacities. It seems to me, and I'm sure to many others, that the notion of help is umbilically linked to colonization. However, one can never be sure. I will seek help in the work of Steve Biko and Paulo Freire, guiding texts for the Pedagogy of Action work in radical pedagogy work in South Africa, the Caribbean, and the United States. The work of Biko and Freire has been seminal guides in my practice, so I hope that a rereading can help me probe some key questions I have been grappling with. I believe that help, as we know, is not a problem in and of itself. The problem is the implications. In a word, where nothing is free, that whose expense is help. In this presentation, I hope to share some of my discomforts with the notion of help, particularly Western help in South Africa, in the context of my fields of practice, education, and art. Well, obviously, I'm not into art, but the other things I'm very familiar with. And this is a panel that I structured and I wanted because I think it's a very important discourse for us to have with recipients. Because the recipient's voice is always absent. And how they really feel about help is never even thought about. And so I think it's very important that we think about what does the recipient feel who must extend their hands constantly for help. And I think that there are several things. One I want to start off with is that most of these students in here could not have been where they are or come to South Africa without help. They've all had scholarships, they've asked for money, they've run around trying to seek help from lots and lots of places. So everybody understands the importance of help and the importance of education and scholarship. And all of us, in many respects, have been the beneficiaries of that help. So I don't want to disabuse anyone of the fact that the help has been needed and has been used, and we receive help all the time. However, I think that there's a really different perspective that I want to bring about this help, because I have been a part of an NGO in the Caribbean. I have been a part of applications in which I make decisions who get into programs and who do not. So I see both sides of it. And one thing I know, and I really am tired of HIV personally, since I've been working on it since 1989. And I at this point, HIV is a huge industrial complex. There are billions of dollars all over the world invested in HIV. And yet when Stacey Tembiso works on the front lines in the rural area in KwaZulu-Natal, it's as though none of those billions have ever been spent. And people who work in rural areas, which are far removed from urban centers, continue to feel this. There are other things that are happening in South Africa, and one of them is a burgeoning drug problem, which is going to exacerbate the issue of HIV. So there are issues that are going on with people that we're not connecting to and translating to. The biggest beneficiaries of HIV are people like myself. Academics, people who do research, people who can travel up and down to conferences, people who get funding to go and speak at conferences, and people who do scientific research. I'm not saying that these things should not happen, but I think there's an overpreponderance of this kind of investment in HIV research that is based on quantitative rather than qualitative. And when we develop methods, the users have to use them. And if you believe that you are not important, that your life is not important, then you will constantly put yourself second and you will not adhere. So the drugs are meaningless if the person does not use it. The condoms are meaningless if the person does not use it. So these are very basic, elementary facts on the ground. And so the funding then has to be responsible for this, but it is not, because when smaller NGOs decide that they want to ask for money for behavioral programs, it is not important on the list of priorities. It is not important for it to be given any length of time. So we can give a behavioral program funding for a year. That is laughable. You cannot do an effective behavioral project in 1 year. It's not possible. So how are you going to fund something that for 5 years, and how can you fund something for 5 years? It's not possible for people, the funders, to think that, because it was funded for a short term and you must show results in the short term.
so the very structure of funding is not favorable to the recipient. The recipient must be cognizant with what the funders want. So if you're doing a behavioral program, then you must show results. And how is it possible to show behavioral results in a short period of time? So it sets up behavioral programs to fail. And so if you do a research project that is scientifically based, and you did a trial of 50 people, and that trial failed, then it redounds to the benefit of the researchers that they did this trial and it failed. They could publicize on it, they could get funding to go to a conference on it, and they could present it, and they could become famous from a failure because it's scientific. It's the scientific method that is more important. And so we need to, when we talk about these things, we really need to be questioning the paradigms of funding and help. Who decides on the help? And who makes decisions about the help? When you're a lowly funded and dependent NGO for funding to come from a variety of places, you sit down and you write proposals. And if you didn't get the funding, then the woman who cleans the office will probably lose her job. The person who drives will probably lose his or her job. The person who is there as the person who feeds or do elementary things, they will lose their jobs. So what you become as a funder is a person, what you become as a funded person is a person who begin to use the funds as a way to keep people employed. And so you buy into many things which are really not relevant to what your purpose is. So you will get funding for passing out condoms when you really need funding to train some people. So what you will do then is that you will pass out some condoms and use the rest of the money to train some people. So you're constantly subverting the funding to a degree in which you could meet the needs of the people with whom you work. So I have written funding proposals when I know at the time that I am at some level prostituting myself to the funder in my head for the larger good of the community with whom I work. And I find that both a colonized response, a response for people who have very little funding, who are dependent, and in a certain respect, being in countries who are dependent on larger cultures, who continue to decide what should be funded and who should be funded. And so I think we continue to remain through the funding cycles. I don't care whether it's the United States government, whether it's the Ford Foundation, whether it's a church, whether it's the Red Cross, or whoever it is. They have their own agendas of why they're doing things. So I always look at, say, the burgeoning sort of Christianity in some parts of Africa. And when people say, do you see the picture of the baby with the flies all over the baby and the picture of black kids and so forth, asking for money? And I say to myself, well, if that religious group went there and dug a well and brought water, who am I to say that they should not do this? Because that well has been dug and the person has received the water. And so we constantly allow ourselves to be colonized, to give up our own values, our own indigenous values, in order to meet our elementary basic needs. So the recipient has to be silent and is silenced by the fact that we are poor, our governments are corrupt, our leaders are doing a terrible job and constantly selling us out at a certain level ourselves. But we are not exempt from that or separated from that, because we also do that in our own individual small ways ourselves. So we're caught in a bind. I want the funding, I want to do the work, but I also need to give up something of what is really genuine in order to get that funding. And I have given that up many, many times. So when I sit here and I talk to you about being colonized, I do it, and I do it because I'm not a dumb person, and I'm not unconscious. So when I write that stuff, I know what I'm writing. It is as though I'm writing away a part of my soul. And we do that all the time. I know many of us who are in this room do that all the time, because we're so caught up in the emergency needs of our people that we do it anyway. So this is being done not by a bunch of idiots. These are being done by caring, loving, supportive people who want to find ways to solve the problems in their own community. So what do you do about it? What do you do about the fact that we're caught up in this bind? And a lot of the funders, the Bill Gates Foundation, for example, think they're doing a wonderful job. I know that Bill Gates did a lot of work in India on maternal and child health, which people later criticized because it was not doing the correct kind of intervention. So there are lots of ways in which we can deal with this. But I think one of the most important ways is our ability to participate in our democracy. In the United States, I think Hillary Clinton is going to be running for election next year, 2016. I think she's going to have to raise $1 billion. I see Setambiso and the work that he does in his rural community that he is located. And I see this young man so beautiful, so talented, so connected and committed. And I think to myself, how could this young man be in a place of decision making? How is that possible? And the question is, if it's not possible, why? Does he have to be rich? Does he have to kowtow to the union? Does he have to have friends in high places? What is it that he has to do in order to do that? There's a real issue in our democracies about getting good people in the right places. I mean, Hillary Clinton is a woman, and we think it's a good thing for a woman to run for the presidency. But you cannot be a poor woman and run for the presidency. You cannot be a middle-class woman and run for the presidency. And you cannot be almost rich person and run for the presidency. Unless you're able to garner that kind of funding. So although we want a woman, what kind of woman do we want? Although we want a black person, what kind of black person do we want? Although we want a rural person, what kind of rural person that we want? And we talk a lot in POA about empowerment. It is very clear the inability of Palestinians to have empowerment because of the nature of the oppressive state in which they live. But the oppressive states that we live in do not in any way compare to what's going on over there. We don't have to show a pass every 10 blocks or something. The passes that we have to pass to show is our passes to ourselves. A lot of the students in my classes don't vote. They don't participate in the democracy because, well, I'm not going to vote because I don't like Hillary and I don't like this person, I don't like that person. In the United States, the Republicans are now running the government because people did not vote. And it seems like an elementary thing, but when I'm writing a funding proposal coming from USAID, it makes a difference who's running the government and who's appointed over that office. It makes a difference. And I want to talk about Kenny for a little bit here. He doesn't expect it, but that's part of it. I mean, Kenny is a guide that shows you Johannesburg. every single time we come, each student must be exposed to Kenny. And the reason I have that is because Kenny's eye and voice about South Africa is the most beautiful and conscientized voices I've ever come across. And Kenny educated himself. Kenny did not go to university. He educated himself, and when you speak to him, you feel as though you are equal to him, because he is not less than anybody else. But he is in a tourist industry, and I would like Kenny to come up as part of the respondent to this. He's a tourist industry, and you know, there was a president of the country that I was born, which is Guyana, although I live in Jamaica and so forth. And he once said, tourism makes pimps of your people. And you know, tourism is a big deal for people in the Caribbean, it's a big deal for South Africa. But what Kenny has to put up with people who come to this country, I'm sure he has many, many stories, but he has to accommodate it, and he has to be kind, and he has to take it, because that is the position which he's in. He is a recipient, and that is his job. I am a recipient because I have written proposals to do work in communities, and that is my job. But it is not a clean job. It's a job where you have to constantly pare away of what will you compromise on. And so you talk to yourself in your head that I will compromise on it because Janet has 2 children, and if I don't get this funding, then her 2 children won't be able to go to school. So I do it. Is that a reason to be a recipient? And if you want to tell me that is not a reason to be a recipient, then what is that reason? Because I know I'm compromising myself. We do this all the time in many ways. Big organizations, small organizations. You know, a lot of students apply for Fulbrights, for example. You know what a Fulbright is? It's a scholarship that is given by the United States government for you to study in countries. And I have read many, many Fulbright applications, because I'm one of the people that read the first line applications. And many of the people who write these applications have no connections in the countries to which they are going. And they come up with the most amazing plans of how they're going to get there and so forth. And when I read them, I dismiss them. But there are people on the committee that they don't think so. They don't think that. They think that, oh, that's a good idea, but they're not aligning themselves with anybody in the country. That's important to me, but I see it through different eyes. I see it as though somebody is when I see people applying to things for South Africa, I feel as though they're applying to my home. And I must protect it. And I must say, no, this person is not doing what they're supposed. You cannot do the same thing if you come into America. And that's the whole notion of colonization. You cannot write some kind of flippant application that you will, when you get to America, you will call somebody. And no, you can't even submit such an application. And that is what it means to be, when I talk about hegemonic America, that's what I mean. You cannot go to America without a visa. And so when people begin to ask for a visa of Americans, they become highly incensed. The lines for visas to America in most countries go around for hours. You know why? Because we want to be in America, we want to be in the place of America, we want to be allied to the power of America. And so people do all kinds of things to do that. And it's a form of recipient that we are. And people, if you apply for a visa to America in Jamaica, you have to fork out $500 US. And 90% of the time, you are going to be rejected. And so we compromise ourselves again because we want to come to America. And so we caught in a bind of colonization that is so strong and so powerful that it's very difficult for us to extricate ourselves from it. There are little kids here who know who American artists are. American kids don't know who South African artists are. So it's a global culture, a powerful culture. And so you see it everywhere. One of the things I tell my students, you cannot come to South Africa and eat at McDonald's. If you want to eat at McDonald's, then stay home. Or Kentucky Fried Chicken. What else American things are everywhere? So it's like you cannot travel and go anywhere. It's like you travel today and you stay at home. So it's a constant. So POA is all of these things that I'm talking about. It's a constant monitoring of how Americans, the students, are. It's a constant monitoring of their privilege that seeps from their pores. They don't think about it. They don't understand it. They do it unconsciously. You can tell they're Americans from the way they walk on the street, the way they hold their heads, the way they can be flippant with clothes, that they don't have to wear any sort of thing that conforms to the local, but they can wear shorts when most women don't wear shorts. They can wear tore up blue jeans because then it becomes a fashion when they do that. But if you're poor and you ever had to wear tear up blue jeans, it's a completely different thing. So they can objectify poverty. They can make it an object that they can sell and own and claim. So there are many things that POA does that has to do with this precise thing that I'm talking about the recipient. Is that how you treat the recipient, how you connect to the recipient, how you connect to your own status of being a recipient yourself. Because POA is predominantly students of color who've all been recipients themselves. So how you understand it, the fact that you are an American does not exempt you from the recipient status of the United States. The fact that the University of Michigan does not recruit black students from Detroit, which is 30 miles away, is a way of dismissing you, even as a recipient. You can't even be a recipient then. So there are many complex things that I want you to think about in terms of who is the recipient and what is the recipient's voice. It's very nuanced, very complex. And so I could talk about this for about another 2 days, but because it's something I feel very strongly about. Because both the recipient needs to be educated and the giver needs to be educated. And we need to be engaged in that process. V drives people around all the time. V is a recipient of either the generosity or the dismissal by the people he drives around all the time. And he's invariably charming and nice. I don't think he's ever cursed anyone out, He's always, you are in a position of being mistreated when you're in that kind of a business. And so everybody is a recipient at some level. And so I want to sort of democratize the notion of recipients, that it's not just NGOs, but it's us individually. And how we treat people who we give things to is equally important as being able to give it. And thank you.